Commission. There you go. Now we all know it's being recorded. Let me just remind everyone that not only is it being recorded, but we're live streaming, and this is on YouTube for public consumption. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, board members are each in their respective homes and places of work for the duration of this recording. I'd like to thank all of you who have joined us here today, and to the members of the public watching our live stream or later the recording of this meeting. Again, welcome very much. I'd like to start off our meeting with a land acknowledgement, and let me just read this out. On behalf of the board, we would like to acknowledge the traditional lands which we are virtually gathered is Treaty 6. We would like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territories for centuries, such as Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakudesau, Sioux, and Blackfoot peoples. We also acknowledge that this as the Métis homeland and the home of the largest concentration of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. It is a welcoming place for all peoples, and who come from around the world to share the Edmonton metropolitan region as home. I should have this acknowledgement memorized by now, but in any case, welcome everybody. So what we have here is the agenda, and as we take a look at the agenda, I'd invite a motion to accept the agenda, unless there's any comment to change it at all. Seeing none, could I ask for a mover?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. By using the raise the hand feature, and Michael, I'll ask you to call out your vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, move the June the 17th of 2021 regular board meeting minutes. They were attached to the package. Any errors or omissions? Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for a motion to accept the minutes as be approved as presented.
Also move.
Thank you very much, Mayor Ralph. Using the hand feature, I'll get you to vote. All in favor? Michael?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Aye.
And that is approved unanimously. Okay, on to the first order of business. Report of the Audit and Finance Committee. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Jankowski, and to the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if the chair of the Audit and Finance Committee wanted to lead off.
Thanks, Mr. Jankowski. No, I don't have too much to lead off on this. This is a policy coming forward to the board post our last Audit and Finance Committee meeting. As mentioned before, we will have several policies coming forward in regards to our finances as we begin to get set up, get our banking institution in place, and begin to move forward. So this is just the next in the series, being the debt management policy. Happy to say that the Audit and Finance Committee had a good review of the policy. We did suggest a couple of amendments to some wording changes to make sure it matched some of the original business cases. Those were brought forward, and so that is now appearing at the board table here for final approval. So I will move it over to CEO Jankowski to add any comments he has.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Laurie. I did want to just sort of highlight a couple of things that were spoken to as well at the Audit and Finance Committee. At that committee, we did provide an update to the committee with regards to the successful receipt of the guarantees that we were seeking, financial guarantees that we were seeking from both the City of Edmonton and City of St. Albert. We did receive those, and the work is underway now to actually finalize the paperwork between the TD Bank and the two guarantors. All of that work is is almost in hand, and we will be well positioned for the future. Other than that, as Councillor Laurie indicated, we did speak with regards to the policy. If I can just flip to the next slide, please. We did bring forward for the committee's endorsement the critical policy around debt management, and you did have that that decision note and the policy attached to your agenda. Essentially, the key element of that debt management policy, which is really required in order to satisfy our ability to draw debt and take on debt from the financial institution that we've been dealing with, the TD Bank. The core of that policy, it allows us to take on debt in order to offset or to pay for the initially incurred stand-up costs for the stand-up of the commission, as well as some of the recurring costs for the first few years until such time as we are in a position to fully operate all of the services that we are going to be operating under the commission's umbrella. Following that point, the policy spells out that generally debt would only be taken on to finance capital investment in either fleet or facilities. And essentially that is the core of the message in the policy. Should additional debt be required for any other purposes, that request would have to come to the board for additional approvals. And with that, I will finalize my comments. And if there are any questions, I know that on the call, we've got Deborah Johnson and myself, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, Mr. Jankowski. Any questions, Councillor Finstad?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question I have with regard to the financing is what will happen to our to us if there are no operational savings resulting from the startup of the commission, and how would the debts then be repaid if there was I guess a bit of a lag or a need for an extension or something along those lines?
So thank you for the question. So essentially there are three sources of revenue that the commission is relying on for the future. The first source would be the fare revenues from our transit operations. The second source would be non-fare revenues from advertising and other potential sources that we might be able to develop. And the third one that is at our kind of everyday, within our everyday operating environment are the levies that we are seeking to recover from the municipalities as per the original business case and as per the original governance bylaw that this board put in place. So those are the principal sources of revenue that would be used to offset the debt requirements and to pay off the debt that we are incurring today. One of the additional things that we've talked about in the past and that we're going to also pursue, though, is potential additional assistance from the senior levels of government. As I've spoken to the board in the past, we are in a very unusual situation, just like all transit agencies across Canada and in fact across North America, where over the course of the last 20 months in particular, our operating costs have gone down and all of our revenue streams have all of our operating costs have gone up, and all of the revenue sources have really diminished in terms of the fare revenues and non-fare revenues. So in the past, the federal government and the provincial governments have kicked in to assist. So in 2020, many municipalities benefited from that assistance, and I would submit that we need to continue to work with all of our industry partners to seek additional assistance going forward to help pay off some of these operating costs and potentially even to help address some of the debt that we are taking on right now in order to stand up the commission to ultimately deliver integrated transit services across the Edmonton area in a more efficient manner.
I appreciate your comments. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Finstad. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, Councillor Laurie, can I look to you to make a motion then to put this on the floor?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I'll move that the board approve the presented debt management policy as endorsed by the Audit and Finance Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Any opening comments?
Nothing much, just to say, appreciate the work that went into this by Deborah and Mr. Jankowski in getting this policy stood up and moved forward. It was great to have the opportunity to ensure that some of the wording matched. We did have a little bit of concern with some of the wording that had come up around when we were able to take debt to fund operating expenses. And so we made sure that that was clear and that we had that ability and we didn't end up with something that could get us in a little bit of a tricky situation. So I'm glad we were able to catch that, make sure that the wording matched and move forward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harris?
Just a question now that the motion's on the floor. As with any of our new policies, and they are all new, these will be reviewed on a periodic basis. What's the timeline on this one? I thought I saw 2021 in it. Or is that going to be after we've kind of done some more implementation?
So thank you for the question. I don't have the policy in front of me right now. Deborah might know what was in there to start with. I know that in earlier versions of policies and early policies that the board approved, there was the suggestion that all the policies should be reviewed and brought back forward within 180 days. In this particular case, I think it's fair to point out that our financial situation is evolving. We are, as the board has heard, we're carrying out some of the work that we'll be providing a further update on a little later in the agenda, but we are carrying out work now in preparation for delivering a draft budget in late this year, a budget that will reflect those financial realities that I spoke to a little bit earlier. I think it's reasonable to expect that there will be a need to review this policy, but probably within a longer time period. I think within the next few years, we will definitely be challenged with new circumstances, and we will have to bring forward considerations for modifications to this policy.
Yeah, that's great. I understand that some of the policies will need to be reviewed in different timing, and just wanted to, I guess, note that, because it will be critical as we go. There will be changing circumstances, and who knows what the future is going to bring. So with that said, I have no other questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Any other comments on debate? Seeing none, Councillor Laurie, or I should ask Councillor Walters, any comments?
None from me, thanks.
All right, very good. Councillor Laurie, anything to close?
Nothing to close other than just to pass on my thanks to administration for the work that's gone into these.
Fair enough. Then using the raise function, and Councillor Walters, if you'll declare your vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. Moving right along, Mr. Jankowski, HR and Compensation Committee.
Thank you. So again, I will defer to Councillor Harris if Councillor Harris would like to make any opening comments.
Respecting the fact that you've got more to fill in, I'll just make a couple of overarching comments about the committee meeting. We met on July the 14th, and we did talk about a number of things, and some of those are ongoing and evolving, and Mr. Jankowski and his new staff people will report accordingly. But we dealt with the talent acquisition process, got an update on that, and kind of where we are in the process of bringing new people into the fold. We talked briefly about, I guess more than just briefly, on the ongoing policy development in this area and the work that is required. Administration did give an update on the HR administration process, including progress on implementation of payroll software and the benefit plan and pension plan implementation in place for staff for attraction purposes, which I think is critical. And we also talked briefly, and I think it may have also come up at the HR or at the Finance Administration Committee, about the need to continue these virtual meetings until probably sometime in early September, because of the limitations on technology. But I'll defer to Mr. Jankowski on all of those matters. I'm sure he can fill it in, but I think we had a robust discussion. And it's good to see things evolving and starting to build in relation to creating the critical mass that we need to move the board forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Jankowski for his additional comments.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I don't have much to add. I will also, further on in the agenda, I will go through a little bit of the information that we shared with regards to talent acquisition as a CEO update to the entire board. We did introduce one of our new colleagues that has joined the leadership team. Today we'll reintroduce Brian and also introduce one other member that has joined us. The only other thing that I will comment on is the discussion around holding future meetings in either a virtual world, as we have been over the course of the last 20 months, fully in person, or using a hybrid model. And the discussion that we had with the committee centered around that last option, the hybrid option. What we indicated was that despite the fact that we have great partners here in the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce that have made some of the technology available to us to use, when we went forward and tested that technology, and when we thought about the challenges of maintaining physical distancing while also allowing people to join in virtually using a hybrid type model, which would allow for both in person and for virtual connectivity. And when we thought about, or when we attempted or tested the ability to also continue to live stream, we ran into technical challenges that I think we need to get a higher degree of certainty on before we attempt a hybrid type meeting. Since that time, I know Brian Bechtel has been working, contacting a number of your municipalities, identifying what solutions are being put in place, because many organizations are dealing with the same challenges. We are hopeful that we'll be able to put in place a solution that gives us absolute certainty that we won't have technical glitches or issues in terms of carrying out a hybrid type meeting. We are working towards the first such meeting taking place in September. I know that many members of the board want to return to a situation where we can meet in person. However, there is also a desire to allow for virtual connectivity or Zoom type connectivity. So we're working towards that. We're hoping to get that in place. We will report further as we get further along in our evaluations. And with that, I don't have anything else to add. Be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jankowski. Any questions of our CEO or Councillor Harris? Seeing none, we have a motion to accept his information. Councillor Harris, would you care to make this motion?
I would so move that the board accept as information material and discussion as presented during the report from the HR and Compensation Committee.
Fair enough. Any opening comments?
No, I think these are evolving committee discussions, and we're starting to gather steam, and I guess we'll start putting the meat on the bone, so to speak, and do all the things we need to make this a truly functional committee and board going forward. So I thought the discussion was good, and the updates help me as a committee member understand kind of where we're going, what we've accomplished. So it's been good.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harris. Any other comments, questions on debate? Councillor Walters, any comments or debate?
None for me. Sorry, I had to miss the meeting last week.
That's all right. It's all good. Unless you have any closing comments, Councillor Harris, I'll call for the question. Using the hand function, please raise your hand. Councillor Walters, indicate.
Aye.
And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. On to the CEO update. Over to you, Mr. Jankowski.
Thank you. So some of this, for those members that did sit and participate in the HR and Compensation Committee last week. Some of this will be repetitive, but I thought it's important for us to introduce the newest members of our leadership team. I'm very happy that we've now hired employees 2 and 3 into the organization, and we're working now on employee number 4. And maybe in that order, I will introduce, first of all, Brian Bechtel. Brian has been hired now as our Director of Stakeholder Relations and Communication, and Brian joins us after a long and distinguished career in the nonprofit sectors as well as in government. And most recently, Brian worked for the Alberta government for the Ministry of Community Services, working on the provincial poverty reduction campaigns. But prior to that, Brian has been involved both in Alberta and in Manitoba and the city of Winnipeg with a number of non-for-profit organizations. Brian was involved with the United Way in Winnipeg, was also involved in agencies dealing with homelessness prevention. And similarly, prior to that, when Brian was in the Edmonton area, Brian worked on a number of social justice initiatives. Brian was also a former head of the Edmonton Food Bank, and Brian has spent a lot of time dealing with advocacy issues, dealing with social justice issues, and has developed a strong network in the Edmonton and in the Alberta area. And Brian is going to be working with many of the representatives in your municipalities, dealing with the challenges of providing proper communication, proper materials, positioning our organization moving forward. Later in the agenda, Brian will be making his first presentation to the board, dealing with our branding initiative that I know many board members are extremely interested in. With that, maybe I'll turn it over to Brian just to say a couple of words.
Thank you, Paul, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm really pleased to be on the team here. I'm happy to be on the ground floor of something that I think is really important, and I'm pleased to be working in the municipal world again. I had a little previous experience in the Lodge Foundation business a while ago, but again, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be on board.
Welcome, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other person that I'm extremely happy to introduce is on your screens as well. Agata Lewandowski might be familiar to some of you. Agata joins us after most recently having worked with one of the charitable foundations here in Edmonton. But prior to that, Agata has provided a lot of executive support, most recently prior to that with the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board. And Agata has also provided support to senior executives in the Alberta government for 20 plus years prior to moving to the EMRB. Agata joined us on Monday of this week and is kind of learning the ropes with regards to conducting these virtual sessions that we're involved in today. She's sitting with Haley in one of the boardrooms here at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. And ultimately, Agata will be providing support to all of you, as well as providing support to myself and the senior leadership team. Very glad Agata is here, and I'll just turn it over to Agata just to say hello.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Agata.
All right. Thank you. And the last sort of update that I just wanted to provide is some of you may have heard.
Mr. Jankowski, one moment. Councillor Monkoff-Swain, you had a comment, question?
No, sorry, that was an old hand that was left up. I tried to get it down in time, but you caught me. Sorry.
It's all right. Sorry, Mr. Jankowski, go ahead.
No problem. So the only other thing that I wanted to mention is that you may have seen on some of the municipal job boards and on various other venues. Right now, there is a job ad that's out for our next hire, our next leader, and that is in the financial area. So we're advertising for a director of financial services. That position will be effectively the chief financial officer for this commission. That position will also be responsible for our risk management approaches that we need to put in place to ensure that we address all the financial challenges of setting up a brand new organization and figuring out how we keep that organization financially sustainable. And that position will also be our lead in terms of developing and overseeing our procurement processes as we move forward. We have gone through we've advertised for a 3-week turnaround time on that position, and it's certainly my hope that we're able to get somebody in the early fall hired to help out the board and help out the organization as it moves forward to standing up. The last position that you will see out there shortly over the course of the next few weeks, probably before the next board meeting as well, you'll see the position of the Chief Transit Operating Official advertised, and we will be going through a similar recruitment process with a similar recruitment period for that. So stay tuned. You may be hearing from some of your municipal staff about the board's work, and you may be getting questions, and I look forward to hearing from all qualified candidates and being able to recruit quality people into these 2 key positions to assist the board as we move forward. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the talent acquisition side.
Looking good so far, Mr. Jankowski.
Okay, so we will move on to a quick update that I wanted to provide with regards to the work that the board heard about and approved the retention of consulting services for at the last board meeting, and that is to carry out the service planning work and the financial analysis work that we need to carry out in order to be able to present to the board a service plan for start of operations in September of 2022, and ultimately to help build the draft budget that we wish to bring forward to the board for the board's consideration in October of this year, the draft budget for 2022, as well as the multi-year outlook. So flipping to the next page, you might remember this timeline graphic that we shared with the board at the last meeting. Work is proceeding along the timeline. Work is on schedule. We did retain the firm of Anderson Business Consulting, and we've also extended the contract for EY to carry out the transit service planning work and the financial analysis work respectively. The transit service planning work has been underway now for 3 weeks or so, three to 4 weeks. And the financial analysis work is just getting underway because really it will build on the transit service planning work. Flipping to the next page, Anderson Business Consulting has been meeting. So Andrew Anderson and Aaron Toop of WSP, who's a sub-consultant to Anderson Business Consulting, have been meeting with all of the transit planning and transit operations staff in your various municipalities over the course of the last 3 weeks. I've had the privilege of sitting in on a number of those initial meetings, and we've been collecting primarily the information relative to today's service levels, as well as the service levels that many of the transit agencies are seeking to implement starting in September of this year, recognizing that it's likely that there will be a significant return to transit ridership, primarily associated with the return to post-secondary education institutions of students. So over the course of the last number of weeks, we've met with every one of your agencies or every one of the transit planning officials in your respective municipalities. And I won't bother going through the various bullet points that are on this slide in detail, but suffice it to say that many of your organizations are planning for a ramp up of operations starting in September to deal with largely that anticipated return of students to post-secondary institutions. In our initial touch points with the agencies Many of the transit planning officials have actually had discussions with post-secondary institutions. And while those post-secondary institutions have not made a firm commitment to 100% back in person at teaching approaches, many of them are moving to hybrid approaches. Nevertheless, they are indicating that there will be a large number of students returning to the various campuses in order to get that on-site education. So we're all extremely hopeful. We are all also working. I know many of the officials in your respective municipalities are working on signing off and exercising the agreements for UPass use, which is really beneficial to not just the agencies today in 2021, but it signals that there is a commitment on the part of the various post-secondary institutions, and most particularly the student bodies in those institutions, to actually move forward with a UPass, which guarantees a certain amount of that fair revenue stream that I spoke about a little bit earlier. It's great to see that that many of the institutions are exercising those agreements for the fall of this year. It will provide much needed fair revenue, guaranteed fair revenue for the transit agencies today, and ultimately for the integrated transit operations that we will be overseeing towards the end of 2022. So really good news on that front. The bigger questions really revolve around the return, a potential return, and potential changes to the employment in other areas, and what is the transit ridership going to be relative to, for example, what used to be a historic large demographic that used to use transit to get to the downtown office towers in Edmonton every day. Those questions are still out there. However, much of the work that is being now undertaken by Anderson and by the various transit officials from the 8 municipalities is revolving around what we might anticipate this year and next year in terms of those types of transit ridership volumes. So that's about all I have to say on this slide, as well as the next slide, other than in terms of the timeline. We did carry out we had a very successful workshop yesterday with all of the transit officials, and there is a further workshop planned later in August, whereby our folks will be sharing with the transit folks from the 8 municipalities what we think the regional transit service planning approach will look like for September 2022. One thing I should say is that through all of the discussions that we've had with respect to the other element of the service that we expect to operate starting in September 2022, that being the local services in those municipalities that have local service, what we're anticipating is that we will essentially be looking at maintaining the service levels that will be in place starting by the fall of this year. We fully anticipate that as service resumes in those various local municipalities, all of those areas outside of Edmonton that do have local transit, what we expect is that come September of 2022, we'll be basically replicating that same service using a blend of operating service models that we will be negotiating with the municipalities by then. So the focus of the work that is underway, real focus of the work that is underway today, is with respect to that intermunicipal travel and what those service levels might look like. We expect to be able to bring forward that report in conformance with that time frame or that timeline that we had shared with you last meeting, and that you see replicated on slide 15. We hope to bring forward all of that transit service planning information in early September. And one of the discussions that I will be having with Chair Broadhead is about the possibility of having a second board meeting in early September. September is that month that we indicated last month. We may need 2 different touch points with the board to really get into the meat of this this conceptual service planning approach before we start building the commission's budget for presentation in October. Happy to answer any questions with regards to that portion of the update.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the work obviously, we're all aware of the impact of COVID on the local transit environment here. And, you know, you don't get into a problem overnight. You also don't get out of a problem overnight. And so I appreciate the work that's going in to prepare for 2022 and the depth of the insight that you're taking the commission into in order to really build a robust case for a reasonable budget for the coming year. And I suspect the board would be more than happy to put in the work in September in order to fully understand the impact of service plans for the coming year as it affects each of our own communities and the commission as a whole. Happy to take any questions. Any questions for Mr. Jankowski here?
I have one, Wes, if I can.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Walters.
Thanks. Thanks for all that, Paul. So you mentioned UPass. Are the agreements all in good shape or to be signed or signed from all the municipalities? Can you say a little bit more about that? I didn't.
Sure.
Kind of bounced off that kind of
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah, so my understanding from the various discussions that we've had with the transit operating staff in all of the municipalities is that those agreements have now been drafted, and that they are being exercised or being authorized and executed in many of the municipalities. So I don't have an exact figure as to who has executed it and who hasn't, but it's my understanding that those documents are kind of going back and forth between the municipal staff and the university or post-secondary educational institutions.
Right. And then as it relates to the routes in the startup for September in Edmonton, those scenarios are being provided to you by our staff. Like I just, maybe just a sense of how comfortable they are with the specifics at this point in terms of the ridership.
Yeah, so the information that we're getting from the ETS staff is that in terms of the bus network redesign that was identified and put into place in April of this year, that in the April iteration, there were some of the services that were not at kind of the full service level, but that by September of this year, the ETS intends to essentially go to the full implementation of the bus network redesign that was tabled and started in April of this year. So they're going forward, as I understand it, with the full service as it was approved by council and discussed, and now they're moving forward.
Okay. That's great. That aligns with what I'm hearing. So thanks for that.
Yep.
Thanks. That's all, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thanks, Councillor Walters. Mayor Ralph?
Yeah, mine's just kind of go back to the UPass. So just a little bit more clarification on that. Has there been discussions with the municipalities or the counties that have dropped out of the regional transit in regards to how this is going to work with a UPass?
So I don't have a great answer for that, Mayor Ralph. I certainly haven't been involved in those discussions. My anticipation is that the larger operators that aren't members of the EMTSC are likely going ahead and executing their agreements as well.
Okay, I was just wondering if there had been any communication between the other operators and yourself. So
no.
Okay. Well, you won't be able to answer the next question, so I'll just pass. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Ralph. Any other questions in relation to the service plan? Well, thanks for the update, Mr. Jankowski. Looking forward to the work coming forward in the coming months.
Thank you. And maybe just to go back to that last point that Mayor Ralph raised, I do have in my schedule a meeting with one of the largest non-participating members or non-participating transit operators with some of the senior staff there. I may have more information for you sometime in August, Mayor Ralph.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, the last significant portion of the CEO update I did want to provide, and this was as a result of a few discussions that I had with some of the members of the board. There has been an interest expressed to bring forward an update on the public engagement work that Berlin has been involved in, and Brian Bechtel is now overseeing that whole stakeholder and public outreach approach. And today on our call, we have Brian Bechtel and Michael Brechtel. Michael is, you might remember, is the lead from Berlin on this public outreach work. And with that, I know that Michael has joined us, and Michael and I spoke with Brian yesterday and over the course of the last few days. Michael and Brian are here to provide an update. I will turn it over first to Brian and take it from there. This update is intended to take about 10 to 15 minutes and just walk you through some of the work that you may have been hearing about from some of your constituents as some of the work has gotten underway. With that, turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Paul, Mr. Chairman. So if we have a slide deck that we're going to work with you, and then I'm just going to start us off, and then I'll bring Michael in with me. So this is, as Paul mentioned, an update on the see all the good work and the good foundation that have been set, and have some good time spent with Paul and the folks at Berlin, as Paul mentioned. Next slide, please. So we want to start off by saying that really the reason we're doing this, the underlying purpose and drive, is so that we can build a brand that is valued by and compelling for our audiences. And we need to understand more about how we build and position this brand in a way that speaks to the needs and aspirations of key stakeholders and audiences. And we also want to establish a baseline for brand awareness and sentiment, establish the metrics against which we can measure the future. Over the course of this, we'll also refine future messaging to better understand the shared and distinct needs of the various audiences, and we can create core and supplementary messages that address all of the needs of the various groups. And secondly, the other big reason is collecting information that will inform the system design process. So through this process, we'll better understand how audiences interpret and see the value and the return on investment analysis. And while it won't necessarily provide hard data in the same way that the work that Paul was talking about, it'll provide a very important contextual data and to help us understand the various audiences we're speaking to. Next slide, please. So in terms of how this information that we're gathering, and you'll hear a bit more about it as we move through the slide, but it'll be used to, first of all, to inform the brand positioning process. We want a brand that is, again, as we said, both strategically and visually compelling, a value proposition, and the various themes that we'll support. This information will also drive how we communicate with the public and our various stakeholder groups as we identify them, and informing communication channels or the methods that we use to communicate and to receive feedback. At the same time, to refine future messages, refining and building key messaging frameworks, and also as we go, prioritizing and targeting key messages to the diverse audiences, particularly as we move through the critical path to September 22, we'll have different audiences that we want to speak to with different messages. And again, as I said earlier, collecting this information will inform this system design process. A little bit more information about how we build value into the system through the design process, and as it relates to the above activities. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to ask Michael Brechtel to. Every time I say that name, it does sound like my own name, Paul. Yeah, Michael Brechtel to step in and take it from there. Go ahead, Michael.
Great, thanks, Brian. Everyone can hear me okay? That's perfect. Good to see everybody again. Thanks for letting me join you today for a couple of minutes. I'll run through this pretty quickly. Just wanted to start with a bit of context. Again, not many of you have seen this, or at least we've been described to you at some point. This is the process we're going through overall as part of this brand exercise that we're working with you on. On the left-hand side, we're starting with research, and that's mostly the work we're doing today, as well as the work we're doing over the course of the summer, the quantitative research and some other consultations, both with you and with others. The focus and brand foundation building is part through the middle, where we really kind of take that, synthesize it into meaningful kind of outputs, and then build some strategy behind that. That's the brand positioning process, and that's what we're doing after this. And then implementation, it begins with the building of the visual identity system and that side of the brand that you know about, and then it extends out into everything. And our recommendations through that brand foundation process will inform the implementation well beyond the visual side of what this brand is into how it's implemented and engages well with the folks in this market and the different audiences. So next slide, please. Just to give an update on timelines, some of the work has been progressing really quickly and on schedule. There's two elements, the brand assessment and the supplementary engagement, that are not on schedule, but those are okay. Those three elements, the brand assessment, the qualitative and quantitative research, and the supplementary engagement, they all just have to get done at some point during this phase of the process. So those are all things that just have to be essentially completed by that kind of early September timeframe. So we've still got lots of time to get those done. No concern on our end about the order of those happening, and we will catch up on those others. Again, you see at the very bottom, the brand positioning strategy and visual identity system development as the things that follow what we're doing here. And the reason the brand positioning strategy begins before all this ends is because we begin to synthesize the information that's coming out of all this research as it comes out. Next slide, please. So just again, revisiting the four engagement tactics that are part of the phase of the project we're in today. So we're going to work with you folks, some group of internal stakeholders to talk about the vision and direction for the commission and for the network. It's called a brand assessment. It's a workshop that we do. The qualitative research, which is what we're mostly going to talk about today. The quantitative research that follows the qualitative. So the qualitative allows us to explore the issue with the audiences so that we're really informed when we go out to do that measurable research, the quantitative stuff that really sets those benchmarks, identifies key issues for stakeholders, and helps us do some really detailed planning and prioritizing. And then those engagement sessions with key stakeholders, and we've talked about those briefly in the past, but that's to round out our understanding of how this brand can be best, most valuable to your stakeholders. We need to talk to some of them too. So we'll be working with Brian on that, and really excited to get working with him on that part of the process. Next slide, please. So what we've done so far, we've conducted 6 focus groups. I don't have the final numbers. We recruited 8 per group. Usually not all 8 show up, but that's how many recruited. We'll get that in the final report that we deliver to you. They've included a mix of transit users and non-users throughout our communities. We began planning the quantitative survey that's going to market August 20th. And we've begun setting up for the brand assessment and some of those other workshops through some planning around stakeholder identification and needs. Next slide, please. So this is the fun part. This is the themes emerging from these focus groups. And just a caveat, these are themes emerging. These are our observations from those groups. There is a more comprehensive report that will be delivered to us from Leger, our research partner. And we'll work with them to kind of take that report and prepare again the report for all of you that has all the final data and insights from these sessions. But some of the things that we've begun to see through this consultation include the respondents see value in improving access to Edmonton, but less so in travel between integrated ring communities. So that doesn't mean they don't see value. Frequent users of the system did see some value in that travel between integrated ring communities, but for a lot of folks that we spoke to, again in this sample, a lot of the focus was on travel to and from Edmonton. Some respondents are skeptical about the success of major transit changes due to the history of perceived issues with other major projects, and any large infrastructure or related or sort of project has challenges. People have had some experiences with past major transit changes that have made them a little bit skeptical. So there's things we can do to address that, but that was a good takeaway. And bad, any conversations about this kind of system or change are often overshadowed by perceived service gaps. So you'll hear a little bit more about this later, but people really, it's a very personal question. It's, am I still getting my bus on time? Can overshadow the broader conversation. So that was another good takeaway, and there's some things we can do to address that. Next slide, please. We also heard really clearly from respondents that they were really appreciative of the opportunity to provide input. And that's, I know that sounds obvious in a lot of ways, but it was a strong perspective. It was one that wasn't just in passing. Respondents were overwhelmingly supportive of the idea that this will help ensure better service and more efficient delivery of services. That core raison d'etre, right? That important core of what's happening here is something that people were able to identify and they attributed value to it. So that's good. That I think the core thrust of this initiative really does resonate with folks. There was a particularly strong response to the idea of improvements in ease of payment. So moving from what was one system to another, having it all as one system, there's a sense that's a big and positive change for a lot of folks that had experience transitioning between. And in general, there was a sense that this is the kind of initiative that will show a positive return on investment. So that's a good thing. There was a very positive there. Non-transit users in the integrated ring communities were relatively more likely to be interested in trying a new system. So that is as compared to non-transit users in Edmonton, in the city. So it was just again, when we talk about the diverse needs of stakeholder groups throughout this region, and we're serving all of them, there are some differences in terms of kind of interest and willingness and curiosity that is good to be aware of. Respondents generally agreed that a regional transit system can move more people, which reduces cars on the road and our carbon footprint. So there was an awareness of this, which is good. Next slide, please. Respondents feel that a regional transit system is, and this was interesting stuff to come out of these conversations, but when they got into a conversation like this, they did feel that it's almost a hallmark of a proper global city to have an integrated metro transit system. So that was interesting. That was one of the places they went with this. To their minds, it offered an opportunity for the integrated ring communities to grow, which I think was a really interesting insight on their part. Some of it came from the mobility of labor today, especially with more people working more from home, and the opportunities to exercise more discretion in where you're working from might offer opportunities for the integrated ring communities with better transit offerings. There was an opportunity to explore other communities, which was great, and it offers a better sense of place and collaboration for the region. So those are neat things that came out too. And overall, respondents were supportive of the idea of regional transit. So that was a great start, really good positive baseline for us. Next slide, please. I am tearing through this stuff. Don't worry, there'll be lots more information when we get into the full report, but I just wanted to make sure that we touched on the high level stuff. Next slide, please. So considerations, broke these out into two broad categories, although they are very integrated and related. So when it comes to brand and messaging, it's great to know that we're starting from a position of support, but we do want to make sure that we're aware that we need to manage expectations of the service if we want to maintain the level of support. So this coming together of these systems isn't, we're not throwing everything away and starting from scratch. We're integrating systems to provide better service more efficiently. And that's something that does resonate. But that's where people's heads are today. And if we really do our best to continue to reinforce that and manage those expectations, we should be able to maintain that kind of support. Stakeholder outreach should be happening early and often. I know this sounds, again, like an obvious statement, but there was a very strong sense of appreciation from the participants in these, that they were able to participate. And also that, they were frustrated at some other related processes or similar processes where they didn't feel they were engaged appropriately. And so like one example was, and again, this is, this is just from this group of people, but there was a sense among some that there was, that the city of Edmonton, the most recent changes to the system They said, well, yeah, the city communicated well about that, but they did it too late and for too short a period of time. And so, again, no judgment of what was actually done there, because sometimes, you know, perception is very hard to affect on that front. It's hard to do that engagement, but we did hear engagement is a real priority for the public. So that was an important takeaway. And we need to continue to refine key messages and develop those FAQs to address those questions and concerns, and to create consistent messaging for all stakeholders. And we can start on that, you know, immediately. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I think, we missed one. My apologies. I wonder if, oh, there is one missing there. That's okay. The other slide that isn't in there right now related to the considerations around system design. So as we come out of this, we need to, I'm gonna pull it up because I have it on my other, and I can just talk you through it. Or I can't. My apologies. I'm not sure where that one is. Brian, do you have that one handy? Just want to make sure I'm covering it properly.
I'm sorry, I don't. I'm just working from the same one on here, Michael.
Okay, I'll pull it up. I have it right here. I'm sorry for the delay, everybody. It'll just take 10 seconds. I've got it handy here. The second was the takeaways that relate to system design. It's not, again, nothing in this should surprise anybody in particular, but when we talk to folks, we talk about the idea of them appreciating that there are environmental benefits and social benefits to having this kind of network, and either getting cars off the road or offering more opportunities for mobility for folks to get around the region. They appreciate those things, but what's in it for me is still the most important thing. That's where people's minds start. And that's not a surprise. And that's not a judgment in any way of the folks we talk to. That's very normal for us to see in a process like this. People's own personal context is what they understand best. And so it's the best way for them to be able to analyze the value of something. So for them, what's in it for me is really important. So they're most interested in how transit's going to be able to serve their own individual needs. So they understand and appreciate the environmental and social benefits, but that's not where their brain starts. They start with what's in it for me. And that's okay. Again, that sounds judgmental, and it's not. That's very normal and healthy. So what we need to do is consider that. We need to be looking at their specific needs as we go out through this engagement process and start looking at system design. And we also need to ensure that the people in the region feel confident that the brand is interested in understanding their own personal needs, that we want to know what's in it, what they need to be in it for them, and that the brand is in a position and committed to addressing that, to making sure that the what's in it for them is working for them. So again, a lot of that sounds obvious. It's great to go through a process like this to validate some of those things that you might assume to be true. But it's great to have that confirmation, and we'll bring you that full report. And we will also, the quantitative research will bring up a whole slew of other really interesting insights. So I can't wait to walk you through that and share that with you when we get to that point. So I'm going to pass it back over to Brian. Again, really nice to see everybody. Thanks again for taking the time. I took about 1 minute longer than I wanted to, so sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. So as Michael mentioned, in terms of our key next steps, we will produce a full report, as Michael mentioned, with the Leger data and the focus group, and we'll produce and submit that report to the board. Also, throughout the process, we're going to identify the themes and issues to test in the quantitative survey, which has already been developed, but this will be used to inform that. And as we mentioned, identify the key drivers and the baseline metrics that we want to establish against which we will measure again in the future. And Michael also mentioned the priority for a brand assessment session, engagement sessions with key stakeholders, and probably coming up first will be one that would include members of the board and our own internal organization. So with that, I'll say thank you, Michael, and I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, and Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Any questions before we move on from this topic? Well, I have one to you, Michael. So we've lived, those of us on the board and those who have been involved in this, have sort of lived and breathed this over the last number of years. When you went out to the focus groups, I can't imagine that people who are going about their daily lives dealing with COVID are well aware of the fact that there's even a Metro Commission being formed. Is that a general sense? And as we move forward, how would you consider to get our value proposition out there? Is that part of the work that you're doing here?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So it's two parts of that. One is I don't believe that there is a really broad awareness of what's happening. There is some limited, but that's to be expected, right? We haven't been out in the market talking about it a lot. There's been kind of some spots of media and other things, but we'll be able to give you really clear numbers on that in terms of awareness and sentiment after the quantitative research. We'll be able to tell you, within the region and the different parts of it, here's how many people know what's going on. And that's one of our key benchmarks. And it's one of our key benchmarks because, yes, absolutely, to your other question, that is one of the things we want to figure out how to change, both in terms of general awareness that this is a thing that's happening, but also in terms of the value proposition. And so those are all key outputs of those next phases of the process. So once we finish the research, we go into the brand positioning strategy, which is some of that. So here we are now, this is where we stand, this is what people understand, this is what people believe, this is what people need and value. How do we communicate effectively with them? How do we help them? How do we answer all their questions and make sure that they're comfortable and excited about what's happening here? So those are some of our key next steps, and I'm really excited to see the numbers in terms of awareness. I suspect they will not be very high today, but again, no surprise there. This is the front edge of this journey. So, and yes, we will provide recommendations through that brand positioning process for some of the strategies that we might apply to grow those numbers.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Councillor Finstad?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question I have relates to how the information was gathered. I'm sure it's going to be in the full report later, but just a little synopsis of how the information was gathered, how the focus groups were derived, and in order to lead the discussion, were there certain questions that were asked to get going to sort of lead people towards a certain conclusion, or were they just completely wide open discussion type?
Yeah, so the process of running a focus group like this is one that's very familiar to us, and it's a very normal process for us and for the research firm we work with, for Leger. They've done tons of these that relate to transit over the years. In a group like this, we have a moderator, we have a recruitment, and we have a moderator guide. And so the recruitment is a system that starts with what we call a screener. So we identify what kind of people we need to have a mix of in the groups. So that's when we talk about having both transit users and non-transit users, and having representation from that is effective in capturing the diverse opinions and needs within the region. So recruitment is done in a very scientific way for these. They have large panels of folks, large lists, and they call them and ask if they're interested in participating. And what they do is they make sure they have enough of every particular kind of person that we need to have to ensure the diversity of perspectives and opinions, both geographically and in terms of demographics and other qualities. So we recruit really using a very scientific and rigorous kind of process to make sure it's unbiased in the recruitment of the participants. And then the same applies during the moderation and the session itself. So we develop a moderator guide that runs through the series of questions and activities that we're ask people to participate in. And the moderator, a big part of their role is ensuring that the process isn't biased. So we test people's knowledge on subjects. Usually we start with some open-ended kind of work where we don't tell them a lot about what we're talking about, and we try to get some of their opinions and thinking on certain subjects or ideas. And then when we want to dig into specific topics or issues, in this case, things like regional transit or others, we may share with them certain pieces of information, say, here's this information. Given these contextual pieces of information, what do you think about this? So we try to start in as unbiased a way as possible. So at the beginning, they may have less information about what's happening, so we know we aren't biasing their responses by giving them a whole bunch of information. And then if we want to dig into specific things, then we do provide some information and ask them to kind of respond. But it's definitely not intended to lead anybody. It's intended to effectively capture the true levels of understanding and true beliefs and true needs of the folks that are participating. We are not looking for a specific outcome. We're looking really to understand kind of where they are and meet them where they are.
Appreciate your comments. Thank you. It just helps me a little better understand the process that we went through, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. And Councillor Finstad, when we get into the report and reporting back to you on all that, I'll be more than happy to kind of walk you through some of those questions that we asked and some of those some of the process that we went through, because it is interesting. It's neat stuff. So I'd be happy to sit down and chat with you about that.
Any other questions? Well, it's fascinating work, Michael, and certainly looking forward to the full report. And I got to tell you, and I told this to Mr. Jankowski this morning, one of the comments I got back from my mayor was, I'm assuming you're doing brand work because you got to come up with something better than EMTSC. Anyway.
Well, we will, and it's funny. I was talking to Brian about this yesterday, and he was looking up another integrated transit system, and I can't remember their acronym was like 9 letters. It wasn't 6. It was crazy.
TransLink. Their legal name is South Coast Transit Linkage and Ferries Commission Association or something. So, but it's just TransLink. That's what we need. Yeah.
There you go.
So we'll come up with something better.
All right.
Be good. All right. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Jankowski.
Thank you. So that concludes our CEO update, and with that, I'll just turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Fair enough. So we're entering into a bit of a new process, and I talked with Mr. Jankowski this morning, and he brought this proposal forward for us as a board to formally receive correspondence. And I think there's a couple of things that come out of that. Particularly, it provides to our viewing public and into the public realm an account and accountability for the actions of our board and correspondence back in relation to that. So last month, there was a motion that letter get written to the EMRB and the chair of the IRTMP task force. And so attached for the receipt of this correspondence is not only my letter going out, not written by me, but signed by me. And then, of course, the correspondence coming back from the chair of the IRTMP task force, Mayor Katcher. So if we could go through, they were included in the package, correct, Mr. Jankowski?
Yes, Mr. Chair, they were both shown, they're both in the facilitation deck. And I believe that the initial letter from yourself to the chair of the EMRB was circulated to all members when it did go out. Similarly, I know that the response from Mayor Katcher from Fort Saskatchewan was circulated to all members of the board through her email. So I think all members have seen it. It is replicated here in front of you, both of those pieces of correspondence. And what we would suggest is that we've suggested that when there are pieces of correspondence like this that speak to the board and communicate to the board, our intent, our process, suggested process as we move forward is that we would bring this to the board with a suggestion of motion to receive correspondence such as this, and where appropriate to also direct an appropriate action coming out of the receipt of the communication. One thing I will just bring to your attention, Mr. Chair, as well, is that just going back, once we deal with this item, we did not move a motion to receive the information relative to the CEO's update, so you may wish to come back to that later on.
We will do that for sure. Councillor Monkoff-Swain?
Yeah, thank you. And this is great. Appreciate being included in on the correspondence. I don't know if we need it as a standing agenda item. I think a lot of this could be done on a consent agenda where it's just provided to us, and then we can accept that up front. We're all reading our briefing packages in advance, so I'm sure this is just, the first time just to show us what it looks like, but soon this is going to become pretty, this is going to be quite a lot of correspondence. So I think consent agenda, and then if there are specific things that you're looking for direction on in terms of us responding, then maybe we add that to the agenda. But I think that's probably the best way forward in terms of receiving this type of correspondence.
Thank you.
Fair enough. That's great comment. Thank you, Councillor. So we're actually have two motions, and one is where I missed the previous motion to accept the CEO update and the information provided therein, and then the receipt of this particular information as well. So going back to the CEO update, Councillor Monkoff-Swain, would you like to make this motion?
Yeah, I can make the motion that we accept this as information here.
Okay. Any opening comments?
Nope.
Fair enough. Using the raise the hand function, then I'll call them the motion. Councillor Walters?
Aye, sir.
Thank you. And that's passed unanimously. And then a motion to receive this, the correspondence. Could I get somebody to make that motion?
I'll move that. Wes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walters. That the board received the July 14/21 Mayor Catcher's email responding to the chair and direct CEO to coordinate the appropriate meeting with the MRB representatives. Any opening comments, Councillor Walters?
No, none.
All right, then I'll call the question using the raise the hand function. Please vote. Councillor Walters? And that's passed
Aye.
unanimously. Thank you very much. And now we have a motion to move in camera. I saw you wanting to make the previous motion, Councillor McKenzie. Would you care to make this one?
Sure, I'll make this motion.
Okay.
Do we need to read it? I can't remember.
Well, you can go ahead and read it if you wish.
That the board move in camera in accordance with the provisions of Division 2, exceptions to disclosure of the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, RSA 2000 CF 25 as per section 16 through 28.
Thank you very much. Call the question using raise the hand function. Please indicate. Councillor Walters?
Aye.
We are now in camera. Thank you very much.
All right. We will be moving all of you into a breakout room, and when you're completed with in camera, just click the leave breakout room to return to the main session.
Okay.
Haley, will you?
Welcome back. We're now in live session and recording again.
All right. Thank you, Haley. And I see we didn't lose anybody on the trip back to the public meeting. Mr. Jankowski, anything further? Oh, we got a motion?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Actually, I see Councillor Walters was unable to leave the room, so he may rejoin the meeting.
Okay. All right. So is he trying to rejoin, or is he just signed off then?
It's just showing him in the room. So it'll just take 5 seconds and it'll bring him back automatically. There we go. Okay, sorry for the delay there.
No, it's all good. so we have a motion to accept the information. Somebody want to make, thanks, Councillor Finstad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the board accept his information, the material and discussion as presented in camera.
Thank you. Call the question, raise the hand function. All in favor? Michael?
Aye.
Thank you, Michael. And that's carried unanimously. Okay, Mr. Jankowski, anything further on the agenda for today's meeting?
Nothing further, Mr. Chair.
All right. Anybody else on the board? Any closing comments? All right, seeing none, I declare the meeting adjourned. And
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, for phoning in. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
And,
everyone.
have a good one, everyone. Bye now.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Yeah, bye.